So please give us a moment. We're trying to get everybody on, so.
So this is real life entrepreneurship, dealing with stuff on the fly. So as I was saying, the reason Project Forward exists is really to support Black businesses. And when I first started, I was doing a lot of just small business support. So my background includes working for a small business development center that's funded by the SBA. I was also working for what is now called a neighborhood business development center, which is funded by the city of Chicago. And so through these organizations, and as I mentioned, Hussein and I go back, so the very first organization I worked with was a local community development finance institution, meaning we were lending in the space of $50,000 to $250,000 before anybody else was doing it. We focused on women-owned, minority-owned, and businesses located in low to moderate income neighborhoods. And so what I was able to see at that point is there was consistency around what made businesses successful, as well as consistency around why businesses failed. And a lot of it has to do with access to capital. And so traditionally, when you hear someone talk about access to capital, they're normally talking about financial capital. So you're talking about cash. However, capital, there are multiple forms of capital, which includes social capital. So really who you know, what are your relationships? I'm sure you've heard in Chicago the statement of like, who sent you and why are you here? That's very, very real. So having a level of social capital translates into a certain type of currency that will make you successful in business. The other forms of capital also include intellectual capital. So part of the reason why Sunshine is doing this is to give its alumni and participants some additional currency around information and knowledge sharing. And so what we are going to cover today is really around the City of Chicago's Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. And I want to be very clear, we will take some time to go over the application itself, but the reality is there are a number of workshops that do that already. What is typically not told are the pitfalls, the problems that businesses will run into, and some of the ways that you need to overcome these challenges. So the reality is the city has had the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund program, and while it has awarded hundreds of applicants, very few of those applicants have actually completed their projects for a variety of reasons. And so what we want to do today is to help you mitigate some of those risks, to be able to, if you do decide to move forward on the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, really understanding at this point, you become a developer. You are either becoming a developer or you are hiring a developer. And so from that perspective, we want to ensure that businesses really understand what they're getting into, because it hasn't necessarily been presented that way. And so when the city does their workshops, they really go through, here's the application, here's the history of the NOF. So we'll take some time to do that, but the panelists that we've brought on today are people who have actually gone through the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund as business owners, as well as organizations that can provide you financing for the rest of what would be considered your capital stack or the rest of your funding to get your project complete. So those are two of the major reasons why people don't really execute their projects. One, because they don't understand what they're really getting into, and two, they may not be prepared for the access to capital portion. So that is really what we will discuss today. I will do my best to try to monitor the chat, and I do think there are going to be some people who end up coming in later, so I will do my best to not duplicate Q&A. So I will share my screen at this point, and if we could do a very quick intro of the panelists that are currently on the line. So Danelle, I know you have a time constraint. How long do I have you? You're still muted. I don't know if you're trying to talk. Okay, Hussein, while Danelle deals with his tech issues, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, few minutes. So my name is Hussein Bampuri. Thank you again, Sunshine. Thank you, Christyn, for having me. I work with, as Christyn mentioned, I work with Cibc Bank. We're a full-service bank that does, retail banking, small business banking, things like that. And I come from similar background in what Christyn mentioned. We both worked at a small business development center a long time ago. And from there, I myself kind of went into the micro lending world, worked for, which many of you probably already aware of, an organization called Accion in Chicago. So I work with them. And so I've been in the micro lending field, but also just kind of general working with small businesses. The reason I do that is I'm a product of a small business owner. My father has a hardware store at which I've helped him with. He's had it for over 30 years. So that's kind of where I come from. Again, like I said, I work in our community development group at the bank right now. And I think we, Sunshine works with one of my colleagues, Chantel Hampton, already. What we work basically in our community development. Basically, what that means is working with entrepreneurs and small businesses such as yourself, and with programs like NOF, SPIF, which Christyn might get into as well. That's about it.
Hussein, can you discuss because you mentioned microloans and microfinance. Can you describe what that actually is? Sure.
So, I mean, for the purpose of small business lending here in the U.S., micro lending, just small loans anywhere from like $1,000, $2,000 to what banks also in the small business world, or even the SBA considers micro lending up to $100,000. So that's kind of the micro lending. But when I talk about micro lenders such as Accion or even our group at the bank, and even some other banks that may do some micro lending, it's usually really loans of $50,000 or less, and honestly, average loan size of like $10,000 to $15,000. So those are what's truly kind of the micro loans, which is honestly, we can have a whole series on that. Is different from what micro lending is outside of the U.S. It's definitely a more formalized process here in the U.S. in terms of micro lending. And then there's different ways of getting access to that, which, again, Chris, I don't know if you want me into deal, but, doing online lending, crowdfunding, things like that, which, can be sources for micro lending outside of just the general banks and micro lenders that are out there.
Okay, and Danelle, I think you are off of mute. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Christyn?
Yes.
Hey, there we go. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. I'm Danelle Digby. I'm the owner and operator of The Woodline, Chicago's very first pop-up restaurant, event space, and Chicago Southside Experience.
So I work with Danelle on his Neighborhood Opportunity Fund project, and we will get into that very shortly. But I do want to do an overview. Quandra, are you able to moderate the chat?
I am.
Okay.
Yes, I can do that.
So I want to do a very quick overview of the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. And Quandra, I will make sure that you have these slides, but they are available on the City of Chicago's website. Hopefully you have been to the city's NOF site. So again, I am not going to go into as much detail as they do because I want to make sure we have enough time to get through the additional presentation, but I do want to ensure that you have a firm grasp understanding of what the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund is. So typically this program, and we do have someone from Department of Planning and Development on, Patrick Brutus.
Hey, hi everybody, good evening.
Good evening. Mr. Brutus, do you do any direct work with NOF?
I do not, but we have a robust NOF team, and as you know, our NOF small funding window round is open right now, and it closes, I believe, November 6th.
November 6th at 10 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Yes.
So you need to make sure you have your applications done and uploaded to the system prior to November 6th at 10 p.m.
And I'm sure you're going to remind our guest tonight that the NOF Small is a program that funds up to $250,000 in grants. And so we're really excited about this. We want to make sure that we really promote this NOF vehicle. Obviously, the city's goals and as well as our department goals are really trying to ensure as much equity as possible. We want to make sure that we're really hitting the South and West Sides and all small business community.
Thank you, Mr. Brutus. So yes, as Patrick mentioned, Neighborhood Opportunity Program or the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund is currently open for under $250,000 is this application process. You actually can apply for more than that, but it is a separate, the process is slightly different. So today we will primarily be focused on 250 and below, but if you do have questions on larger amounts, we can discuss that as well. So what you see in front of you is the City of Chicago's NOF team for the smaller grants. So Sophia Carey, she has been a phenomenal person to work with. I have worked with her for years prior to her even coming on the NOF team. She is one of the people at the city who actually, like, she's really good at her job and she's really passionate about what she does. And Ruben would be your point of contact for Summer Corps. So the way the program works is, while the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund is managed by, or it's a program of the City of Chicago, Summer Corps is the program partner who manages it. So most of the time, if you end up getting an award, you will be dealing with someone from Summer Corps, and that person would be Ruben. And their information is in this PowerPoint as well. So the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund is funded really by downtown developments. And so when people ask, why can't the NOF come out on a regular basis? Part of that is because there has to be a certain amount of money that's in the fund to be able to fund the projects that you guys would be asking for money for. So there are additional fees or special fees paid by downtown area development projects. 80% go into the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, and then the 20% go into other initiatives. And so as you look back at the history of the NOF, it was launched in 2017 and has continued to move forward through 2020. And so again, the program currently has 157 active and completed projects, but they have awarded more than that. And so we want to make sure, if you are one of these people who do get an award, that you are able to execute your program in a timely manner. So to date, I think NOF has had about 7 or 8 award rounds. And I am working with some people who were in round 1 who still have not executed their projects. And we want to ensure you are not one of those people. So the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund is, as Patrick Brutus mentioned, really focused on equitable development. So it is primarily for what is called commercial corridors, so commercial strips on the city's south, southwest, and west sides. And it really is on a location basis. So when you are applying for the grant, you will need to enter the address of the project that you are looking to do, and they will tell you if it's in a qualified investment corridor. So what the NOF will do is, you can either be the property owner, you can be the tenant of the space, or you could be a nonprofit organization. What NOF will not cover is a residential development. So there are some projects that are what's called mixed use projects, meaning it might be commercial or retail on the ground floor and residential up top. The Neighborhood Opportunity Fund will only cover the commercial component of that project. It will not cover manufacturing or industrial businesses, social service organizations, churches, daycares, places of worship. It won't cover those. Previous grantees, you might be familiar with some of these entities. Sip and Savor has been an awardee, the 345 Gallery on the West Side, and a few other organizations are listed as samples here. The funds can be utilized for renovation of existing spaces and new construction. So you could either be a startup that's going into a space that exists, or an established business that's trying to expand, or you're doing something that's new construction, but do understand the reimbursement rates or the matching rate for the programs vary upon if you are a new construction project or a renovation project. So do understand that some of the information is going to be based upon if you're new, like if this is a totally new ground up construction, or if it's a renovation. NOF will cover what's typically considered real estate leasehold improvements. And they would typically be major improvements. HVAC, signage is questionable, but it will usually cover the signage holder, but not the sign itself, because typically the sign itself can be taken away. Plumbing, electrical, architectural, and engineering fees, facade, security programming. And while here they say building acquisition, they will not give you that money up front. So what they will do is consider an allowance towards your acquisition cost. So you still will need to come up with the money on your own, typically, to acquire the facility. So it's not like they would give it to you and then you could use it to buy the building. They would give you a portion of the consideration of your purchase price within the overall ask of what your request is. What will not be allowed, operating expenses for a business. So paying your salary of the staff or the taxes or anything of that nature, this grant is not for that. Minor repairs. So if you only want to paint the interior of the business or paint the facade of the business, this will not cover that. If you have major code violations, it's not going to cover that either. So you have to have other money, which again is why Hussein and will refer you to some other lending organizations to be able to deal with some of those things if you find out that there are some issues with the property you're looking to move into.
Kirsten, is this a good time to maybe ask a question or two? I know we kind of started a little early, so maybe we could slow it down just a little bit, but is this a good time to interject with a question?
Sure. I am trying to get back to the Q&A field, but yes, go ahead and ask.
Okay, so this is part is along where you just, the slide you were just on, asking about reimbursable. My understanding is that the $250,000 is a reimbursable grant, which seems to mean that you need to pay for development, construction services, and then get reimbursed for services. Would you help to affirm or deny this understanding?
Let me be clear. I misspoke when I said reimbursable. There is another program that the city manages that is a reimbursable grant, the Small Business Improvement Fund. Mm-hmm. So the NOF is not set up to be reimbursable. What they have done is set up an escrow that your contractor can draw down on. So what they do is approve your project phase by phase by phase. And when I turn over the floor to Danelle, he can kind of talk about that. But I think he had some things where he had to get reimbursed because he paid for it out of pocket. But the way it's ideally set up is that it's not reimbursable, is that you will get, like, that money will be set aside and your contractor, once those portions are approved and you submit your appropriate paperwork, they pay the contractor out directly. Does that answer the question?
And also, with that being said, I think yes, absolutely. It answers my question. Hopefully it answers the person who asked that question. But along those lines, I know the city also made some changes, because at one point it was, it was my understanding, was reimbursable maybe a couple of years ago.
It was never. So people did reimbursements because their particular timeline may not have lined up with the city's approval. So if you had to turn in 10 documents and you wanted to move forward without turning that stuff in, then you pay for it out of pocket after you've gotten your award letter, and then the city would reimburse you. But that wasn't the way the program was ideally set up to work.
Okay. But they have they've sort of mitigated that by adding some new changes. Are those new changes in the?
Though that has always been there.
Or will you all be speaking to that?
No, what I'm saying is the escrow piece has always been, so the reimbursement piece is a misconception in that sense. The city has always had the escrow for the contractors. The issue is typically when people are not in alignment with turning in their paperwork, and they may have an outside deadline of some sort. So they say, I'm gonna go ahead and pay this and then be reimbursed. but it wasn't supposed to be set up that way. And so what also people might be confused upon is NOF is only going to cover between 30% and 75% of your project cost. So depending on, as I said, if you are new construction, that's the 30% window. Renovation is 50%, and then there are 2 additional what they call wealth building bonuses. So either the business owner themselves lives in one of the qualified investment areas, and you don't have to live in the qualified investment area that your business is in. So that same map that I mentioned that you have to enter that address into, if you enter your home address and you're the business owner and it says you're in a qualified investment area, then you're eligible for an additional 25% wealth bonus. As well as if your majority of your staff are living in qualified investment areas, then you are eligible for that 25% wealth building bonus.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions at this point, Quandra?
There is another one about, I don't know if this is a good part in the presentation to answer this question, but does the grant cover property taxes of leased property? Who is responsible for the property taxes? Okay.
That's what I just said. It will not cover, this grant is for leasehold improvements, like physical, hard, tangible real estate asset. If it is not tied to the real estate asset, it typically will not be covered.
Christyn, can I interject?
Yes.
You're saying, yeah, and just to elaborate on that, it's in terms of what knowing what Christyn's saying, and the fixed asset, it's if you can pull it out and back it up into a truck, like Christyn mentioned, like if a sign or like a refrigerator that you want to put in there, if it's not attached to the property, that's not going to be covered. So it's stuff that's essentially attached to the physical property, like flooring, tuck pointing, infrastructure, stuff like that.
Okay. Great.
Okay, so we have, I think Dion has joined. He indicated he was wrapping a call. And I want to make sure we have the opportunity for Danelle to speak. So I do want to turn the floor over to them. I will continue this really quickly, but the City of Chicago's website, you enter the project address, it will tell you if you're eligible or not. Then there is a very quick 8-question kind of pre-questionnaire. If you don't answer all of these right, they will not allow you to apply. So if you answer the questions, and what they're pretty much seeing is, have you done your due diligence? Do you have site control? Meaning, do you either have ownership of the property? Are you under contract for the property? Do you have a letter of intent if you're leasing? Is there something that says you can do this in this space? And they ask you that. At this point, they're not asking for proof of it, but for the application, you should have that. But that is what they're asking about. They also ask you, do you know your budget? Do you think you'll be able to complete the project within a year? Do you have the financing? You know, where are you in getting the financing for the rest of the project? What percentage of financing do you have, and how do you plan to do it? So are you self-financed, or do you plan to go and apply for a loan? And so if you don't appropriately answer those questions, it will not generate the code for you to be able to enter in that code to then apply. And so the application is very straightforward, but what I do want to ensure that you understand, there is a section for supplemental files and supplemental documentation. While some of these things say they're supplemental, I strongly advise all the clients that I work with to have as much information as possible, meaning photos of the site, actual construction estimates, preliminary design drawings and or construction schedules, proof of site control, funding documentation, meaning do you have a letter of intent from a bank? Do you have proof of funds? And if you are a startup business, you need to have a business plan. And part of that is just to ensure that you do have a solid concept. So there is a section in the application where it's asking you about your project, but you also need to be able to explain very clearly what your concept is and address some of the concerns that NOF goes through. So what they're looking at is project readiness, meaning can you actually start the project within a timely manner. Do you have site control is the primary consideration there. Financial feasibility. Do you have the funds to complete the project? So if you say your overall project cost is $1 million and you're applying for $250,000 and you don't have the remaining money, that project is not financially feasible. The construction plan. Is your construction plan, does it make sense? And the catalytic impact, which is probably one of the bigger things that you'll hear the city talk about. How does your plan for what you're doing impact the neighborhood and or the commercial corridor that you're in? And so some people will say, I want to do a restaurant. That's cool, but if you are doing an exact concept that's next door to the space that you're proposing, that doesn't have catalytic impact. Also, what they will consider is, are there groups of applicants or multiple applicants that are applying within the same commercial strip? So if it's you and you have two of your neighbors, you need to mention your neighbors are applying in the application as well, because that would mean instead of one business being revitalized, there's a potential for 3 businesses in a very close proximity to be updated, and that would have greater catalytic impact than that standalone business. Quandra, are there any questions at this point?
They said, okay, here's another one. Well, a couple of them. One is asking, she has a lease space for a restaurant that needs some renovation and wants to know, will the grant cover water heaters or furnaces?
Yes, HVAC is covered, electrical is covered, wiring, flooring. Again, anything that typically, once you do it in that business, it would stay in that space. So yes, it would.
Great. And then the other question is, they said I qualify for investment area, but she said no residential property.
No residential property.
Okay.
So this is a commercial, this is focused on the commercial corridors. So from the perspective of a grantee, once they decide who is going to be awarded, 3 to 6 months as a finalist, you are supposed to verify documents. And so again, this is some of the problems that people ran into. And Dion and Donnell, do you want to chime in here as far as your experience while you were a grantee of the NOF?
Yeah. The overall experience was actually really enlightening. We had to. I kind of messed up in my awardee approval timeline because we started with the general contractor and we had to switch the general contractor out. But overall, getting the documentation together, keeping proper documentation, aligning the GC, the contractor, and making sure that they're in place and properly performing, and keeping in line with the city's guidelines and regulations for the grant. Making sure that the items that are not covered and are covered are specifically set aside. So when we did apply for our submit our docs, everything was in line with what they asked. Overall, it was slightly challenging, but we got it done, and eventually ended up being very helpful.
And Donnell, was this your first real estate rehab project?
No. I've practiced real estate for almost 20 years here in the Chicagoland area. So I'm an experienced rehabber. So the rehab part was easy, falling into guidelines for the specific things that the city wanted to see, and the NOF grant guidelines was really the difficult thing. But once we were given direction with Summer Corps, and they sat down and walked us through the steps, and Project Forward, got a hold of us and got us through the project. It became so much more easier.
So this is part of the challenge. Danelle is an appraiser, and as he said, this was not his first real estate renovation project. For many business owners, the NOF is their first renovation project, and he still ran into challenges. He had issues with his general contractor, and then from the standpoint of ensuring that he was adhering to what the city was requesting of him, there was the other concern. Danelle, what was the size of your project?
This particular project that we received an NOF on, you mean the size of the building or the size of the funding?
The size of the funding. What was your budget for the project?
Overall, I think this project cost me about almost $3.25 total for renovation. But the more particular thing that I think that I really want to convey is that with the NOF funding, I think I received the grant during the third round.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. So I applied. You know, me being an experienced professional in the field, I applied for round 1 and round 2, and out of my frustration of not being funded, I contacted a friend of mine, and he referred Project Forward to me. And Christian came along, and voila, it happened. She saw the flaws in my application. You guys pointed out what I needed to do, what direction I needed to go, and how just my language and application didn't fit the criteria of what the city wanted to see. But my project was overall, you know, a great project to be funded for NOF. I just was doing it wrong, trying to do it independently and by myself.
Dion, are you on the line? Okay, well, unfortunately, Dion has not joined us yet. But Dion also did a project. And the interesting thing about Dion is he's an architect.
I'm here. You can't hear me?
I hear you now, Dion.
Oh, that was weird.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so my name's Dion Lucas. I'm an architect by trade. I usually don't disclose that, but it's like an Achilles sometimes. I'm a member of E.G. Wood. So E.G. Wood is a collective of 6 entrepreneurial groups, individuals that started out as the Inglewood Thrive Zone Collective. So we were a part of the first batch of applicants to the Retail Thrive Zone NOF pool. And one of the things that we did do that no one else really had done before in any SPIF or Thrive Zone kind of program is that we applied as a unit, as a group of 5 different businesses in Inglewood with an idea of using our grant funds to leverage and build a collective project, right? So we would help each other through that process. And I will admit that part of that strategy really revolved around me as an architect trying to secure clients. My objective was if I can help these other 4 individuals build their project strategy and apply for this grant. In that grant, it was a line item for architecture and design and engineering. And I put myself in that line item saying, hey, if you win this grant, then you're going to have to pay me some way, somehow. What I didn't know is the parameters of that grant and how it functioned in the earlier days was very, very difficult to capture those funds. So we ended up, winning, all 5 of us, and then we brought in a 6th member. So collectively, we made up about 80% of all of the grants awarded for the Inglewood community during that time. We're still together today, and we are building our projects out today. And I would say that the city and Summer Corps have been very, very patient with us. Some things that we've learned along the way is that the reimbursable process in and of itself is very, very difficult. It's very challenging. It's challenging both from an entrepreneurial standpoint, definitely challenging from a lender standpoint, especially if your lender is unfamiliar with the receivership part of the grant or how the grant functions from a City of Chicago standpoint. And it's also challenging, as Donnell spoke of, in the reporting. My advice to everyone on this call is when you start, or even before you start, before you even apply for the grant, ensure that you have every accounting measure in place to track every single dollar you spend, all of it. It doesn't matter if you're buying ink pens for the business or ink pens for the project. Make sure you're tracking it, because when the city or any other lender or investor looks at your project, they want to look at it holistically. They want to know how much you've spent on everything to get to this point, and then what are your intentions for moving forward. And that's been a very, I think that's been our biggest benefit, is that from the onset, we've tracked everything. Our total project budget is hovering around 550, 600,000. But keep in mind, that's for 3 different businesses in the first round. And then we have another project slated at around 400K for the next crop of entrepreneurs. So it's not an easy undertaking. And I would admit, just even being an architect, having that skill set as a designer and managing projects is totally different when you're the developer of the project. There's so many different parameters involved with building out your space. My advice really is go back to Donnell, call Project Forward, or call someone who has that experience, bring them on your team early, and be willing to pay that cost to have somebody guide you through that process. It just makes your life a whole lot easier.
Dion, who provided the rest of the financing for the developments?
So we raised, in total, we've raised about $300,000 from private investors. We have a bridge loan from LISC for $329,000, and then we've personally put about $100,000 into the project.
Okay, and so there is a point, LISC, we do have LISC on the call. So once we get a little further through, and they will be the next up to talk, would be LISC, Marcus Yancey from LISC and Hussein Bonpuri from CBIC. But again, this is why I want to make sure you guys understand the other side of the NOF. So not just doing the application, but ensuring that the financial piece, both from a back office accounting support perspective, as well as where is the rest of your money coming from for your project. Donnell, how did you finance the rest of your project?
Initially, my financing, I secured financing through a hard money lender. Originally started off cash with the acquisition of the property, and rolled out to a hard money lender. And then eventually, once the project was completed, I rolled out through CCLF.
Okay, so CCLF is a Chicago Community Loan Fund. They are an organization that does primarily real estate development financing. So they will finance neighborhood developers. They do some small business financing, but they will focus on commercial corridors where they say there is other investment. So meaning if you are the only project in that commercial corridor and there is not an organization that's working to lead the initiative, so depending on what community you're in, if you're on 47th Street or 43rd Street, Quad Communities Development Corporation is handling a lot of the development. If you're in Chatham, they know about Chatham Business Association. So there needs to be an agency that can essentially vouch to say, okay, we're going to work to make sure this business is able to stay here. Otherwise, CCLF may not consider the deal. So Donnell and Dion, one last question for you before I see if anybody else has questions, because I know you got to go, Donnell. If you had anything to change about how you did your NOF, what would you have changed?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, bro.
I would have loved to have my approval process be earlier. You know, because it's the timeline of the renovation. But other than that, you know, nothing really much more than that. Oh my goodness.
Okay, I'm gonna let you go unless does anybody have any questions specifically for Danelle? Because he is he's at soccer with his son. So I'm trying to respect his time, and I do appreciate him coming on to share his wisdom and his experience. But Quandra, are there any questions that are specifically for Danelle?
Well, not a specific question, more so a contact info question, whether or not they can leave their contact information where people can follow up if they need to.
So yes, Quandra, I'll make sure you have everyone's information at the end of this. So when you guys send out your recap, it will be in there.
Okay, great. So in order to get all this good information, we're going to send out a survey that you all going to have to take first, and then we'll give you all this good, juicy information. So thank you.
Okay. And Dion, if you had anything to do differently, what would that be?
I would say being better prepared economically to shoulder the burden of your project. And what I mean by that is that all of us, any entrepreneur applying for this, is either in business or attempting to go into business, and you have very big dreams about what you're doing. So one of the things that happened to us is that we lost about half of our grant funds. And we didn't lose it because the city took it away from us. We lost it because every one of our entrepreneurs got the max award, $250,000. But in the underlying data of the contract of the NOF granting process, it was capped for each property address.
Right.
We have 3 entrepreneurs in each property, which means instead of getting 1.2 million plus in grants, we only got 500,000 in grants. And that's a significant difference in the amount of capital that you expect to come through to fund your project, right? And so what I would say is that whatever you've budgeted, double it. And make sure you've raised at least 50 to 75% of that before you go to your lender. And, you know, we've had kind of an eventful journey with our lender, but I think a lot of that is just on both parties not really understanding the dynamic or the parameters that they're dealing with when it comes to the projects or the desire of that entrepreneur to get the job done. And so what I would say is to relinquish some of that on your lender's part, you know, come to the table with a significant amount of capital that says, hey, look, I just need you for kind of a boost in what I'm trying to do. I don't need you for the whole project. And we weren't really in that position to do so. And so I think if I could change anything, it would be only on our part is to raise more money faster to ensure that we have enough when we go to that lending table to justify our claims of what we're trying to do.
So what Dion is mentioning in regards to the cap is also how some of the other city programs work. The Small Business Improvement Fund program is the same, meaning if it is a multi-unit property, so you have multiple storefronts within the same property, each storefront cannot get the maximum award. There is a cap per storefront because in essence, the way the city looks at it is that landlord then is reaping more benefit than other people would. So from their perspective, they look at it not just from the individual applicant, but from the actual, if you know the example I gave earlier, if there are neighbors that are applying, it's better if those neighbors are in their own individual standalone property as opposed to being neighbors in a multi-storefront space. Because as Dion mentioned, there will be the cap. You won't be able to max out at the $250 per applicant. And then as it stands to the lenders, I do want to bring on Marcus and Hussein at this point. Dion, don't go anywhere because I'll probably need you to chime back in.
I did have a quick question for Dion. Were your properties, were they under one pen or were they under multiple pens and you still didn't receive the maximum?
It's under one pin.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Marcus?
Hey, Chris, and I'm here.
Okay, Hussein already did an intro of himself. Do you want to quickly do that and then I'll go into your questions?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Marcus Yancey. I'm an economic development lender for List Chicago, Local Initiative Support Corporation. We're one of the largest nonprofit economic development organizations in the country with over 35 offices spread throughout. Our main mission is to have positive impact in low to moderate income communities when it comes to workforce development, education, business development, health, and amongst other things. We're a true partner with the City of Chicago, with the NOF, and as well as the Small Business Improvement Fund. We do a lot of work with Summer Corps, just trying to do some bridge and gap financing. So we know Summer Corps very, very well. And, I'd have to say this has definitely been a learning curve. For a lot of us, as Dion had just mentioned, just trying to really be able to understand how this process looks. And it's evolved over the course of the last 3 years, from where it was to where it is at now. And it's starting to become a lot more fluid process, I think, on both sides, just the selection process, how the lenders look at it, but then also the entrepreneur or the business owner being prepared. So thank you for having me this afternoon, this evening, and look forward to continue this conversation.
So moving into the financing piece of the conversation, Quandra, are there any questions before we go into this section?
We do. One person named Root and Vine, if they can give me their names.
Ina. Hey.
Dina. Dina. Okay, thank you, Dina. Just put it in the chat so I have it. But her question is, Chicago Community Loan Fund, can Chicago Community Loan Fund be used with the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund? Can she apply for both?
Yeah, so as far as who your lender is, there really isn't a restriction on your outside funding source. The question's going to be their timeline. In evaluating who your lending partner is, and I call them a partner for a reason, because they do need to understand your business. They do need to understand what you're trying to do. And as Dion said, you're probably going to have to come to the table with more money than you anticipate. Understand this, lenders are not in the space of dealing with risk. So bankers don't want to lose their money. And community development finance institutions, which LISC is and which CCLF, Chicago Community Loan Fund, are, they ask for a lot of information. I tell my clients, like, working with a CDFI is not the same as working with the bank, which is not the same as working with a hard money lender. So while Danelle has gotten off the call, part of the reason he did the hard money is because he's impatient. He had a very specific timeline in his head that he wanted his project done, and the lender's response time was not in alignment with that time frame. So he was willing and had access to other sources of capital that could respond quicker to what he wanted to do. And as Dion mentioned, he did a round of fundraising outside of LISC. So yes, you can use CCLF, but do understand and talk to your lender in regards to what is their underwriting criteria? Meaning, what are they looking at to evaluate your loan? And so some of the questions that I'm going to ask of the bankers and the financiers who are on the call is, what is your sweet spot? And so in many cases, our entrepreneurs do not understand the conversations they should be having with the lender to evaluate if that lending partner is the appropriate partner. They'll just look and say, oh, well, they'll give me money if my credit score is X. However, there are some times some lenders will say, you know what, we're not going to give money in that space because that's too risky for us right now. As a traditional banker, sometimes they'll say, you know what, we're not going to give money to apparel business. We're not going to give money to retail. Back in 2008, and Hussein can talk about this because we were working at a CDFI at the time, When the economy tanked at that point and the lenders pulled back on what they were actually financing, the requirements for credit went up, and there were very clear industries they were not giving money to. So if you had a restaurant, you could not go to a traditional bank and get money. If you had a retail store, you cannot go to a traditional bank and get money. And so with some of the financiers, you have to understand what's also their timeline. So traditional banks may have loan committee once a week. Some of the CDFIs may only have loan committee once a month. And then depending on when you come in the loan cycle, they may have a break for holiday in December or November. They may have a summer break. They may have a winter break. And so there will be times where there is no loan committee. So depending on when you get into that process and submit a complete loan package application to them, it could be 3 months before you go before a loan committee. And so understanding that, yes, CCLF could finance the deal. You need to be more concerned about the timeline for them. I'm going to turn it over to Marcus and Hussein. So can you guys respectively talk about if someone is applying for NOF, at what point does it make sense for them to engage you as a banker or as a financial institution?
Marcus, you want to go or I can go. So on my end at the bank, and again, I'm sure there'll be other questions to talk about other things, but with me as a relationship manager or any of my colleagues, I don't think it hurts to reach out to us as you're applying and let us know of your intention. We're not going to start the application process until you have for the most part, a commitment letter. So there's what's called a conditional commitment letter that is provided through Summer Corps to the applicant saying, okay, well, we've conditionally approved this project for $75,000. The project is $100,000 because you meet that 75% requirement, and you need to get the financing, and you have X amount of time to obtain financing and start the project. So at that time, that's the time we want you to apply. But you can definitely reach out to myself, and I'm sure the Marcus will probably say the same thing as, and some of the other lenders reach out to kind of have that conversation, saying, okay, well, this is why, because then we can tell you right away, oh, we're not working with you as this. You're not the type of business that we're probably going to work with, or because I'll tell you right now, we're not going to work with people who are just landlords. If you're just commercial property owners, for the most part, we're not going to work with you. We want to look at the businesses, and so if you're a business property owner, you own the property, but you're having your business, your office, whatever that may be, we'll be working with. More likely than not, we're not working with real estate developers or landlords. Anyways, Marcus.
Yeah, sure. I don't know what the question was, Christyn. You want to?
Sorry, no, I went along.
Question. But we just talking freely here, because if we're talking freely here, I can just run through a few things, right? So one of Liz's sweet spots is working directly with people that are in the areas which the NOF grants are, both South and West sides. I think, we want to make sure that we're being impactful and we're building relationships with our potential borrowers. We get it. Not everybody who's applying for these grants are going to have A1 credit scores. I mean, I've done deals, with people who have credit scores for 600, credit scores of 600, but we've been able to finance them for $500,000 at like 120, 130% LTV. So the thing is that,
Marcus, what's LTV?
Loan to value. So that means that the property was worth $100,000, but we gave them $130,000 for other incidentals, which nobody does that. Normally the average LTV is 80% on real estate transactions. I think, one of the things that I think that we do well is trying to provide pre-development costs, right? I run into a lot of people with the NOF grants. They have no idea what their project entails. They don't reach out to people like Dion. I see James on the line here that are experienced in this particular space, right? You need to have a process in place. You need to go out and be able to do pre-development work, which consists of getting you an architect, getting drawings done, getting appraisals, getting environmentals. You need to have all these things in order and able to successfully apply for an NOF grant. When I do see that, that makes me feel a whole lot comfortable working with you. And at List, we provide pre-development loans. So you can come to us and say, hey, you know what? I really don't know what my project looks like, but I need $50,000. Like, these items cost. And the great thing about the NOF grant is that they actually support pre-development work. So there are funds that are set aside to be able to be reimbursed for those expenses on the pre-development work. And that includes project management, right? I got people who, you run a chicken, you run a chicken shack, or you run a burger joint, or you bake goods. Like, my expertise is not going to be in construction. So you need to go out and hire somebody who actually knows what they're doing. Having, I think, relationships with the city and Summer Corps also help us as well. It allows us to be able to really understand what the process is for reimbursement. It also allows us to be able to understand, the type of projects that they're looking for. Before it was kind of like it was, so somebody over here would get a loan. We get an NOF grant, but it really wouldn't work within the corridor. And now, we're starting to really understand what they're doing. And we want to get behind project investment, especially when you think about the NOF, you think about SPIF, you think about Invest Southwest. We really want to get behind them and support the city on what they're doing. So I think initially we had some challenges, and Dion and I mean, we could talk about some challenges for sure that we had along the way. But I think that it was a learning curve for me as a lender and understanding the program and how, how it impacts the entrepreneur, right? Dion is one of the type of entrepreneurs that are he's a go-getter. He's on it all the time, 24/7. And that's how a lot of entrepreneurs are. They want to get their projects done in a timely fashion. So I think being able to build and have the relationships with your potential lender along the way will allow for the potential for you to, as a lender, to be able to make sure that timelines are accurate, to make sure that, the dispersal of funds are appropriate, and just make sure that you're a true advocate and supporter. That's one of the things that I've learned how to become being a lender at List, is to be a true advocate and supporter. I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm also a lender. And, now I get the passion, like, these projects have to get done. If we don't get these projects done, our communities will continue to look the same way that they've been looking. And we have to have an economic uptick within our communities in order to spur economic growth.
And so,
can I add something to that?
Oh, sure.
So I think in our case with List, what you guys have to keep in mind is that when they're lending, they're trying to look at like cash flow, revenue, a whole lot of other factors besides your credit score, right? You guys may be in a community where the numbers from an appraisal standpoint don't pencil out, but you have good revenue. You have a lower credit score, but your operations seem to be doing quite well. Don't go to a lender like List if you're us and you're not prepared for the long haul. And when I say like us, sorry, train came by. So when I say like us, our engagement with List has been very marriage-like. Like, we've stuck through it, right? And we've weathered the storm. But part of that weathering of the storm is understanding that we went to them with an entirely new business model full of brand new businesses that is a brand new business in and of itself, right? So lending us $350,000+ versus lending someone who has a business that is owned, that is operational, is two different scenarios, right? The risk level is probably 3 to 4 times as much. So your headache is going to be 3 to 4 times as much. And I would just like to, state that when you're pursuing these NOF grants and you have the potential to do something, if your business is not operational in its current state, you're going to have a very, very difficult time securing that funding, irrespective of what you project your income or your revenue to be, simply because you don't have anything to show. And so I want to just stress that as you go down that path or you take that journey, reach out to Marcus. Like I think we've given them a benchmark to look at to say, all right, this is how we're going to handle projects like this coming through our door moving forward. And I think as we continue to progress and grow with them, it'll iron itself out and be a little bit easier to pursue. But don't think that this is just an easy path simply because you got a letter that states you have $250,000 coming your way. It only gets worse from there, but it tends to get better towards the end of your project.
So the one thing that was mentioned was pre-development funds. And I do want to let everyone know that the Chicago Community Trust currently has a grant available for pre-development funds. And I need you to understand that that is not common. It is difficult to get pre-development dollars. And so what also I want you guys to consider is now is an interesting time, right? Between COVID and civil unrest and new mayoral administration and elections, it's an interesting time. And so there is also money that's available that wasn't available before. But part of the consideration is you do need to understand your business model. You do need to understand your impact on the area that you plan to be in. And part of the value that I provided to Donnell when he talks about I redid his application, not only did I redo his application, but I ensured that people who needed to have their eyes on his application knew he was putting in an application. So this is not just, oh, put in a piece of paper and if it sounds good, it's gonna get funded. This is, do the powers that be understand your application and how it fits into what a pre-established plan is. Most of the commercial corridors that you guys are occupying or putting your businesses into have some type of commercial corridor strategy or community development plan. And if you as a business owner are not versed on what that plan is, it makes it a little more difficult to justify how your business or your concept is catalytic. So depending on what community you are in, 9 times out of 10, there is either a quality of life plan, there is a commercial corridor strategy, there is a retail strategy. And in some communities, they have all of those. So if you can't point to how your concept fits within what the community has already identified that it wants, it's harder for someone to get behind it and then say it's catalytic. And that is part of also your conversation with your lender. So when you're talking to an organization that's specifically LISC and CCLF, because they are community-based lenders and community development focused, they need to understand how does what you're saying fit into these already pre-identified desires of your neighborhood. And that was something that sometimes entrepreneurs don't even know how to navigate, or they don't know exists. They say, okay, I see this thing here and I want to do this concept. But if nobody has identified that to be a need in your neighborhood, it is harder for some of the lenders then to get behind it and support it and want to go with you that long haul. So in Inglewood, there was a pre-identified need. What Dion isn't mentioning is he has been a part of a resident association that has been engaging folks for a period of years around what is the development, what is it that the community wants to see. So that is really a very important component. And then where someone comes in like myself or a Sunshine, we are advocating for you. Because in many of the cases of my clients, like when Summercore could not understand what was on his application, they called me. They were like, we know you're working with him. What is he saying? What does this mean? What do you know? What is missing? And so there often needs to be a person or an intermediary or an agency that can speak to the benefit of your business and what it is that you're trying to do better than you can yourself. Because as an entrepreneur, Donnell has a lot of ideas, but they don't always come across in the way that it needs to be able to talk about the impact that he can have. So even when I would coach him on the brand, it's like, okay, you need to say these phrases because these are the buzzwords that the people in my space in economic development respond to. That's not the same language that a regular banker will respond to. And that's not the same language that someone else would respond to. So you as the entrepreneur need to understand how to navigate some of these spaces. And that's why when we're doing the discussion around the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, it's not just about your project. It's how you're telling the story of your project as it fits within the neighborhood. Does it make sense? Can it be done relatively quickly? Do you have a team? And so what Dion has talked about is he had his team. Danelle had to switch who was on his team to get the project done. And what he also didn't mention is there was a fire. So I have had 2 NOF clients directly who have experienced unplanned considerations. So there was one, Danelle had a roof fire, and he also had the city tell him he had to install additional sewage considerations that wasn't in the initial plan. I've had a client who had a car drive into the side of a load-bearing wall. I've also had, I know another NOF, so there are 2 NOF recipients that have had cars drive through their spaces. One on the west side, one on the south side. So when you're hearing Dion talk about ensure that the consideration for your budget is more than you think it will be, it's not just because you're going to be wrong in your estimates. It's going to be because it's inevitably something is going to happen that you did not plan for. And James, LA James is nodding because he does real estate projects. So if you are not, again, if you're not a developer, if you haven't had any experience doing real estate development projects, this is really the consideration that you need to build a team. And what NOF now has allowed for is, as Dion mentioned, he wasn't a line item before. They now have approved TA partners that now can be written into the budgets. And so construction management, project managers, they are now allowing those to be reimbursable expenses that were not reimbursable before. So that is the only modification to what I said earlier about the leasehold fixed cost, fixed asset improvement, is now the city is allowing for the support of architects, and they have to be approved service providing partners to provide you that level of support on the project. Are there any questions at this point?
I don't know. Someone did ask about contractors, but I guess that will be something if maybe she can reach out to you directly, Kirsten, to get that.
Kristen.
Okay, I have a cousin named Christian and a friend named Kirsten, so I can't, it's confusing. I'm sorry.
I can tell you, I'm in the middle. I'm the middle one. I'm not the Kirsten. I'm not the Christian. I'm the Kristen.
Kristen. Okay, Kristen, there is someone about Renovation Leads, but I think she should talk to you directly about that.
Okay. Oh, any leads? Okay, so yeah, and here's the thing. The city's not going to give you leads on contractors. It's a liability issue. What you can do, though, is look and see various completed projects and see if you can reach out to some of the people. So what we'll do in one of the follow-ups is send a link to the previous awardees. You can reach out to some of those people. We also do have some contractors on the call. I don't know if they're taking projects right now, but that is going to be a part of your due diligence. And even as a part of your application, you should have contractor estimates to show that you have a real consideration and understanding around what your renovation expenses will be. So yes, I can provide a couple of resources, but understand these are not recommendations. These are not referrals, and I don't have any liability for if you choose or not to choose to use these people. But the city typically will not give you that. The only thing you can get from the city is a list of debarred contractors, meaning they can't work with the city anymore. So Dion, do you want to talk about how how you think someone should evaluate a contractor?
The best way is either to, secure references from past clients, people that you know whose work you've seen before. That's always a good bet, because you've seen the work, you know who's done it, and then you can use them as a reference for that. If you do not have a list or running list of contractors, reach out to a construction administrator, an architect who has familiarity with that type of work, because they typically work with clients who have GCs that they use, and they evaluate their work on a daily basis. That's their job. Or you can reach out to I think it's the American Contractors Association. They have a lot of local resources there. The National Organization of Minority Architects, AIA Chicago, they have a lot of resources there. It's very tough, I would say, to find the right contractor to fit your project type. So the best way to proceed is to get as many bids and estimates as you can. Never go with the lowest bidder, and always identify someone who gives you every line item that you can think of, or you may not be able to think of, that is listed in their budget. Never go with that lump sum bidder or contractor who says, oh, it's going to cost $50,000. Well, okay, what is that $50,000 made up of? It should have a running list of every single detail, including his overhead and contingency, of what that project entails. And those are the people I usually trust, even if they may be over the next guy, because I know that they've accounted for things that I haven't in my own estimates.
And even as a part of the NOF application, they want a line item estimate. So it would not be the best submission as the additional supplemental information within your application if you just had one lump sum. So you still would need to get something that is broken out with the prospective line item expenses, as opposed to one lump sum. And so there was a question in regards to how much are contractor bids on average. That depends on the scope of your project. So there isn't a particular average bid. One of the things that one of the people at Summer Corps used to say, and he's no longer there, and this is before the NOF program came out, he would strongly encourage people to get 7 bids. And this was for the Small Business Improvement Fund when he managed that. He would tell people, and it wasn't mandatory, but as Dion mentioned, even if you get 3, it may not be enough. So they're encouraging multiple bids for work. And then you also have to understand, if some people know how these programs work, you might start to see an inflation in the cost because they feel like it's not your money per se. So they're going to try to get as much as they can, which is another reason why folks are encouraging multiple bids from multiple contractors. Is it possible to provide samples of a budget application? So the application is on the City of Chicago's website. I will send that link in the chat. And then a sample of a budget. I mean, your budget's gonna vary. Again, that's gonna be dependent upon what the scope of your work is. So I've had clients who are literally renovating completely dilapidated buildings versus clients that are doing, they are going into a vanilla box space and they need to do some customization work. Those are 2 completely different budget considerations.
And can I just interject right there? Also, Sunshine Enterprises is also providing assistance with the NOF. So please reach out to me if you need help with the NOF. I may also be able to, if there are consultants on this call, I'll have their information. And if there are any contractors on this call, please send me your information, because we would like to, if there's a possibility to partner with you, we'll be more than willing to do that as well.
Okay, I know James just hopped off. He said he had to go to class, but I'll make sure, Quandra, you have his information.
Okay.
And then there was another question. I'm sorry. Who can we speak to in the beginning stages of the application about forming a team, reviewing the project? So it depends on where you are. There are organizations that are doing, as Quandra mentioned, Sunshine is a support agency for the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. Other organizations, you're in South Shore. So I think the South Shore Chamber is a Neighborhood Opportunity Fund partner. So Executive Director Tanya Trice, they are a free organization that will assist you in your application process. But many times it is, I would advise you to go to the organization that covers your neighborhood. And the reason is because they can typically advocate on your behalf. They should have some relationships both with the aldermen, the elected officials, and folks within Department of Planning. Now, the aldermen cannot talk to you about NOF in that sense, because they want to ensure that there is no improprietary things that are happening, but they do want to be aware of project development that's happening. So the reason you still would want to engage with the alderman is not to say, okay, can you make sure I get this NOF, but to say, this is a business that I am interested in putting into your corridor. I am looking at securing these types of funds. I want to be open by this date. If you need a liquor license or zoning change or anything like that, that's also why you need to talk to the alderman to ensure that you do have that support. So there have been folks who would say, oh, I want to do a bar. You might not be able to get a liquor license. And you want to find that out sooner than later. And so that would be a reason that you are engaging either with an organization like the Chamber or like the CDC or like Sunshine, who can potentially assist you in navigating that process with the city of Chicago. And then as far as it goes to forming a team and reviewing the project, again, that goes back to more of the construction project managers. And so depending on if you have, and this is really why we keep talking about partnerships. When Dion is like, you know, Lisk is like, we're in a marriage. Yes, because you're a financer, you're going to be in this deal for a while. And so it's the same thing with the people who are doing the work on the project. Like, if you can't trust those people, if you don't feel like they're being responsive to you, you need to properly vet. And so applications are due essentially within a month. They're due November 6th. So part of what Quandra has mentioned, like trying to get me on, my perspective is, if you aren't far enough in this process, you might have to wait until the next round. Because what you could always try to push, but if you don't have a number of the things that we've identified, if you don't have site control, if you don't have a letter, if you don't have detailed bids, you can apply, but your application won't be as strong as if someone who does have that information. So one of the things that I strongly advise to clients is, don't wait until they announce that NOF is accepting applications to start working on your NOF application. Because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be able to get everything that you need to have as robust of an application. And the other consideration is, you don't really know who you're competing with, in the sense of, when they're looking at the NOF applications, they're looking from geographies. So if you're in South Shore, they're going to be looking at projects in South Shore against your project in South Shore, versus looking at a project in South Shore and looking on the West Side, because they are trying to ensure that there is equitable distribution of the funding that's available. And so if you are doing a project, I also strongly advise you to continue to talk to somebody who has gotten the money. As Dion said, talk to them about their contractors. Did they like the experience? Can they make recommendations? And if there are any other things that you don't understand, ensuring that you have a partner that you trust to go ask those questions to. So that is the value of a Sunshine. That is the value of a South Shore Chamber. That's the value of some of these partnering organizations. And if you can't get the answers, call another agency, call another organization. You don't have to work with who is in your area. I just advise that you do, because they have an understanding of some of the other things that I talked about in regards to what's happening in the community and how your development may fit into overall development that's happening in the area. How many rounds of NOF happen within a year? Usually 2. Historically, there has been on average 2 for the small NOF funds. Sometimes they can squeeze out 3, but it really has to do, as I mentioned, with the way the NOF is funded. So right now, because we are in COVID, I don't know how large or how much additional downtown development is going to happen this year. And so we also have to think about, will there be money for multiple rounds for this to occur? And do we know when the next round is? No, they have not. They haven't announced. There will probably not be another round before the end of 2020 because it's closing in November. It will not be around. It will not be another round before the end of this year. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to make sure I got everyone's questions. Lenders, before you guys go, can you talk anything about credit score? Because I don't think we did discuss that. Although the NOF is the money from the city, are you still taking into account the credit score of the applicant?
Sorry, you guys, I lost a little bit of connection. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. No, can't hear you now. Hussein?
Yeah, sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it looks like my connection went away for a second. I'm sorry, you were asking about credit scores, is that correct?
Yes.
On our end, so depending on the type or the amount of the NOF, you know, because we have other lending programs outside of NOF SPIF that we try to fit that into in terms of credit scores. So our minimum credit score is 600. But realistically, if you're on the bottom rung of that, you know, we may not be lending more than $15,000, $20,000, you know, so it could be a very small, which there's been small projects, you know, one of my colleagues just did an NOF where they came in doing an extra I think it was extra 15 or 20 for a small project on the NOS side. It really depends, but we do look at credit score. We definitely look at credit score for the purpose, I mean, and then depending on the loan size, again, because we're doing the gap funding on the NOF. As Christyn mentioned, the NOF, you know, the money itself is going into the escrow. So we're going to be coming in, if it's a $100,000 project and you're getting 75, you're probably coming to us for 25 or maybe a little more for incidentals. You know, so for that 25, we're looking at credit score and we're looking at cash flow, things like that. So we do look at, I mean, we're definitely going to look at the grant as a piece of the collateral. But we're looking at credit scores for sure.
Okay, and I don't think Marcus is still on, and we may have lost him.
Okay.
So I do know that LISC has credit criteria. Dion, do you have any input on the credit criteria from LISC?
I don't. So our credit score was well above 720. And again, I don't think really, it goes back to what you said earlier. Credit score is something they look at kind of last. It's more about, does it fit the character and criteria of the community? And does it make sense for what they're trying to do? So I feel like if you got anything at 600 or above, you should be okay.
And just to elaborate on that, I mean, you know, outside of just NOF, if you're an entrepreneur as a person, you should thrive to also not be at the six. Like I said, we have a minimum credit score of 600, and we could potentially do a loan at, you know, at someone who's on the bottom rung of that. However, you know, you should be striving as an entrepreneur, as a person, to be having the credit scores of, you know, well over 600, mid 600s, high 600s, even though above 700s. You know, that definitely makes it easier in terms of general lending, especially with banks. I mean, the CDFIs are definitely going to be more lenient on that. And at the same time, as I was saying before, we'll do that. We'll have that lower minimum score than other banks and other lenders, not CDFIs, because as Dion mentioned, we're looking at, you know, what is the revenue of the business, what is the impact, what type of business, what's going on in that community, or, you know, are there other types of businesses? We're going to look a whole matter of things and stuff like that. But in general, and this is outside of NOF, I always just stress how important credit is and how important someone should strive to be, you know, improving their credit scores in general.
Does CIBC have a credit builder program?
We do. We have a business credit builder. So we have two. We do have a personal and a business one. So on the business one, which I usually work on our within our community development group, it's essentially anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 loan, but that loan is put into a CD, which you don't get access to. So let's say you get $5,000. You start paying on that $5,000. But that money. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I just have to mute that person.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure. So as I was saying, that $5,000, we'll put that into a CD in your name, and you start paying on that, but you don't get access to that until you're done paying. And so that what that does is build that relationship with us, kind of build that business credit. Now we do one on the consumer side. Because we're a bank, we have to separate those two. So we can't do a business credit builder and have it report to your personal credit bureau. So if you wanted to help impact your personal credit score, you do have to do that on the personal side, which you can do. Again, it's essentially a secured loan. CDFIs do that. Again, I know Oxford's not lending at the moment. They've done that. I know other places like, I think CNI, Chicago Neighborhoods Initiative.
CNI, yes.
That.
They do, and they are actively lending. Unfortunately, they had schedule conflicts. Otherwise, they would have been on the call as well.
Okay.
But they do have a credit builder program. I don't know what the amounts are, but as Hussein mentioned, it really is it's smaller amounts.
Yeah.
So if you do know your credit, your credit challenged, you should start that process prior to your completion of the NOF application.
The good thing with the CDFIs is, unlike our credit, like the personal credit lending, again, the money is put into a CD, you pay down on it, and then you get the money later on. The money's yours. You get to close the CD, do whatever you want with the money. With the CDFI, like Axion and CNI, they will give you the money up front, I believe. But again, depending on how damaged your credit score may be, they may still want some type of collateral or something like that, depending on what it is. So,
and so CNI will give you money that you can spend, unlike the example with the CD. Yeah. And so one of the things I spoke with their president yesterday. One of the things she said is they will give you smaller loans, and the money can be used to clean things up. Like, you may owe the city money. So we also didn't get into that. For the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund and even the Small Business Improvement Fund, which isn't the topic of today, but any sort of city program, even when the city had the $5,000 for small businesses out, they do a scofflaw check. So if you owe the city of Chicago any money, meaning a water bill, parking tickets, I've had business owners that had business fines, or they purchased the property and the business that was in there prior to them had fines and they had to clear it up. So there is a scofflaw check that occurs as a part of the NOF application. After you submit the application, they run a scofflaw check. And you can't get your award money unless you are in a payment plan. And so something like a CNI credit builder loan, you can use the financing to pay your city debt. And so that may be also something, if you know you have tickets, get into a payment plan sooner than later. And you don't have to have the debt completely paid off prior to the awarding of your NOF. You do have to be in an active and current payment plan. So if you had a payment plan and let it lapse, you got to get it in good standing before the city will give you any money. Also, if you are a nonprofit organization, they run your board members. So if any of your board members owe the city any money or have outstanding parking tickets, that will come up on your scofflaw check as well. So for those that are nonprofits, keep that in mind. Your board's fiscal status is going to be ran. They also run with that scofflaw child support. So if you are in a position where you owe child support, you can't get financed for this. So there are a couple of considerations that, depending on where your financial situation stands, you have some alternative options that you may need to take into consideration and handle before moving forward within this process. Someone asked for a list of alternative lenders. That will be sent out in that post-survey follow-up. So we do have a list of a number of the micro lenders that are doing financing. Axion is on that list, and as you mentioned, they are currently not listed. They are currently not lending, but a number of the other organizations are, some of which you may not have heard of, but they are within the CDFI space and they are actively lending. And then the other ones are some of the more real estate focused organizations where you can get financing from.
I think that's it for the chat.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I didn't have any other questions. And really quickly, in regards to the NOF, for those that are interested in doing loans, or I'm sorry, doing the NOF over $250,000, that is a rolling application process. So that does not have a deadline of November 6th. However, they won't be awarding anything until 2021. And so, as I mentioned, all of this is dependent upon the money that ends up in the NOF fund. So if you have a project that's more than $250,000, do understand that you will have to go before City Council. There is a community engagement process. And so a number of the things that I mentioned, as far as making sure it fits within a community strategy, making sure it fits within a retail corridor strategy, that becomes much more important. Because then you have to go through a public scrutiny process. You're going to have to be able to answer questions from varying people. And so you do still do this paper application, but then there is a completely different set of folks that you would engage with. Summer Corps is still involved, but you are dealing more with the city, and you'll have to go through City Council. So I did want to ensure that that was clear.
There were a couple of questions that we did miss, and one was, do you need to show a match of the $250,000 in capital, either finance or cash, in order to get the grant?
So as mentioned, within that piece of supplemental, in a section of the application where they ask for supplemental information, part of that is proof of funds. So it's not mandatory, but it is strongly suggested. And again, it's depending on what your project cost is, you showing that you have an idea of where your financing is going to come from. So you may not be able to have proof of funds by the time you put in the application, but you do need to have an idea of where the rest of your money is going to come from. And it does help if you can show a bank statement to say you have money in the bank. But it's dependent upon, and this is where they talk about financial feasibility. So again, how do you plan to get the remainder of the money for your project? So let's hypothetically say you applied for the Chicago Community Trust, showing your application that you submitted, because I'll normally send you a grant submission page, showing that you applied for that, showing that you're in talks with a lender. So even if you don't have the proof of funds at the point of applying, you need to show that you are in process and you have identified the sources of funds that you will pursue to move forward on your project.
Christyn, yeah, if I can interject, I fully agree, and that's why I mentioned even earlier on. talk to your lender, have that discussion and start talking to them. Because if you have that relationship already, especially with us, I've dealt with some people, and there's some business owners who are in business and they were looking to come to us, and they were looking to apply. And I said, send me your financials, send me, information on what you're thinking. And we can have, you can let them know that, okay, you've been talking to, CIBC or whatever lender that you're talking to. And there are times where we've done before the conditional commitment letter that someone has received from Summer Corps, where based off the financials, we've done ourselves a conditional approval, meaning we need to see further we'll do further due diligence and need to see that the NOF grant is actually getting approved. But we can look at based on financials, and we've done this once more for an existing business that was able to kind of come to us with their with cash flow and the credit, and they were looking to apply, and they are applying. This was with a colleague of mine, so they're in the process right now of I think getting that NOF grant, or they've just recently got the conditional commitment letter. So yeah, have that relation, and it doesn't hurt to say that I'm already in talks or have received this, letter of intent or something like that.
Great.
So
Then another question, I'm sorry, was I think it was actually Danielle. Was that his name? Donnell. Okay. They wanted to know, was his project a small project or a big? Was it up to 250,000? Was it a big project, meaning 250,000 plus?
I responded to that. So both Dion, Donnell had a under 250 project. It was a small NOF.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't know you answered that.
Are there any other questions? So again, can you apply for both? Apply for large and small? Is that what you're asking, James? Can you apply for both large and small? No, you have to pick one. So I have a client now who got a small grant, and that was one of the cars that drove through the wall. And he's like, well, can I go back and just get more money? You would forfeit that small award in order to go for the large award. So it's not even once you get approved for the large award, then you can say, okay, I don't want it. If you decide to go through that, they relinquish the set aside for that. So no, you can't do both. And how supportive is the grant towards the grant? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, one more question. What if it's separate projects? So the city has said they kind of frown upon like multiple projects. So the reality is, I would suggest you look at the scheduling of the timeline of those projects. Just because if it's a small project, you may be able to get through before the large project is even under consideration. So it would just depend, I think, more so on the scheduling of those projects. So like Donnell is going to go for another NOF, but his previous NOF has been done. And even from the Small Business Improvement Fund, you've had owners who could apply multiple times. So I think it really just depends on timing. How supportive is the grant towards creative arts businesses? It's extremely supportive. So the Quarry in South Shore is a NOF recipient. If you have seen the pyramid on 47th Street next to Gallery Gouchard, that was an NOF project. So there are, if you can make the case for the creative need for the entrepreneur, the Supper Club that I mentioned is a restaurant that's inside of artist live workspaces. So it ties into this concept of being a space that supports the artists. So yes, the grant is extremely supportive for creative arts. So because they feel like arts in food are reasons that people come to neighborhoods, that people travel across Chicago to experience this particular type of experience. So the creative art programs or creative art venues are extremely appealing. There have been galleries that have also received funding. So like I said, that 345 gallery that was in the example from the city, they got funded. So there were a few art galleries, a few performing arts centers, and then just literally creative art concepts that have received funding from the city of Chicago. Do we have any additional questions? Dion, is there anything you want to add? You're back on mute, Dion. You unmuted and then you're back muted. Now I think you're having tech issues. Hussein, was there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just want to add again, or not again, but in our lending again, I'm in part of our community development group, which really does focus on entrepreneurs, some startups, and smaller businesses. Our loan spots are from again as low as 2,000 to 200, and out in what could be in conjunction with NOF. This is also a plug for Sunshine, where we have a great program. It's called the Entrepreneurial Training Loan Program, where we do startup loans up to 10,000 if someone goes through and completes one of those programs. As Quandra mentioned, there's the 12-week cohort they have. My colleague Chantel Hampton works with Sunshine, so she'd be able to help with that. But I had a client who did this entrepreneurial training with another organization out on the west side, and they were doing the NOF, and they just came to us to get an extra $10,000 line of credit, right? Because they came in with some of their own funding. They obviously they're getting the grant from NOF, and they came to us to just see if they can get an extra $10,000 credit. So we use kind of the ETP loan program to help get that, and we can do that for some of the other NOF grants. We've done a few NOFs now. Like I said, for the NOFs, we're usually doing existing businesses. If it's going to be a larger loan amount, if it's going to be more than 10, 15,000, we are usually just looking at existing businesses. But again, I would suggest just talking to, really having that relationship first with the support center, like Sunshine or whoever's in your neighborhood, starting with them, because a couple of the NOFs that I'm working on right now are coming from those agencies. I'm working and I'm talking not just to the borrower, they're the client, but to the support center, and we're working as a team to say, okay, how can we get this? And I'm in communications with both the borrower as well as the support agencies. And same thing with Christyn. I've talked to her about some clients and what can we do? How can we help out? Things like that. So that's just the one thing I wanted to add. The ETP loan program that can help as well in doing small lines of credit with the NOF.
Okay, so if we have no more questions, Quandra, I think we can wrap up.
Well, I do have someone joining from Sunshine who's going to speak to our programs at Sunshine, because we want, there may be some people on the line who are not Sunshine graduates, and we would love for you to learn more about our programs.
Yeah.
And Pam, are you on the line?
I am. Sorry, no video today. Anyway, yes, I'm on the line. Hi, everyone. I'm Pam Crenshaw. I'm the recruitment manager at Sunshine Enterprises. And for those of you that don't know about our program, I want to introduce our program to you. Our program starts, it's a journey. We're with our entrepreneurs for the life of their business. And the journey starts with our 12-week business academy, which it is an interactive adult participatory learning program. It's 12 weeks, 1 day a week for 3 hours. You learn about the foundation of business management. And during that time, You will cover all the aspects of a business plan, like knowing your numbers, marketing, bookkeeping, cash flow, competitive analysis, all of those things so that you can have a solid business and be successful in your business. And then the journey doesn't stop there. It continues, and Quandra may have talked about some of our programs after you have graduated, but we're there for an entrepreneur for the life of their business. And I invite you to attend one of our upcoming info sessions to find out more about our program. We're recruiting for our spring semester, which starts in March. And you can find out more by attending one of our info sessions. You can go to www.bit.ly.com/SE info sessions. So once again, www.bit.ly.com/info sessions, SE info sessions, and I invite you to attend. We can answer all of your questions. You can also give me a call at 312-868-0040, extension 203. I'd be happy to answer all of your questions. And if you have any right now, I can answer them now as well.